Hey, everybody. Little new thing going on. I'm Dr. Terry Wager, Generator Consulting, as it says with my name right there. And I am here with my good friend Kevin. And what are we talking about today?
We're talking about intentions being bulldozed by your ego.
And what what are bulldozers used for?
To run stuff over.
Run stuff over, pile it up in a way that is never usable again. Um, and why are we talking about this?
Because it's something that plagues a lot of people in business and life. The road to hell is plagued with good intentions. It's a common saying, and I think that kind of plays into it because what could originally be good intentions could be overtaken by your ego. So
Yeah. And I talk a lot about ego. It's probably my favorite topic because it's the thing that plagues me the most as a human being. And maybe I'm the only one with an ego problem. I probably am. But that might be overstating because my ego just told me to do that. Um, and so the ego loves to separate and create the dangers that we experience. And unfortunately, no matter what our intentions are, our ego will step in and start talking to us about it. And many people call it thinking. I was thinking about this or that. Well, what we were really doing is listening to our ego give us all of the mitigated damage that might happen. And so, you ever have any experience with that? You ever know anybody that has any experience with that?
nope.
No,
No, not at all.
not just no, but hell no.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I can speak for myself. I've certainly experienced this quite a bit. We've talked about it. I have this tendency to play chess with life situations. I love the game of chess, for those who don't know. But using it in life situations can be very not very productive, not the in your best intention to do. And it's important to, because I mean, part of the reason why you protect yourself is really you're protecting your ego. You're avoiding some kind of emotion you don't want to feel, like embarrassment or something like that. And I've personally felt that, whether it's relationships, business, friends, and I know a lot of other people have as well. And I think it's something that happens on a conscious level, but also can happen on an unconscious level. And
Absolutely.
it's worth being aware of that because it could be holding you back from some big strides in your life, and you don't even know it.
Absolutely. And one of the funniest things that I think you said a few weeks back is like, um, our blind spots, we don't see them because they're blind spots, and so we're not aware of our limitations around that. And one of the problems that we tend to run into as people is this idea of, we want to do this thing, we have the intention of maybe being open in a conversation, but then we start worrying about upsetting somebody. And so the intention is to be open, but I start worrying about upsetting somebody, so then I become closed or guarded and make sure that I don't upset them. And the intention might be to have a good conversation, but what I end up doing is bulldozing the intention to have a good conversation by withholding information or with not talking about what I wanted to. And there's a twofold gain for me, which is I don't have to be vulnerable, and two, I don't have to worry about cleaning up a mess. Maybe there's even more that I don't get into or get rejected with my idea that I was going to put out there. And so there's so much gain in actually protecting ourselves, but the reality is I haven't moved forward, and that's where people have a lot of problems with this, um, ego protection and fear of having an outcome they don't know what to deal with.
And that's kind of where the chess piece comes into play. Is trying to guess your opponent's moves before they happen versus speaking your truth and just letting the cards kind of fall where they may and addressing it from there. It's sounds easy in theory, but in practice can be pretty difficult emotionally.
Right. I used to actually, when I had my private practice, I had this little, and I had it from, I don't know. I was a little kid, and my parents had these little orbs with a light bulb in it, and it was just an orb that sat on a little thing, just light, right? But it reminded me so much of people who love to try to guess what's going to happen. And so I had it in my office as a little prop to be like, okay, let's pull this over here and look into the crystal ball and see what is going to happen. And then we can make a decision based on what the crystal ball tells us. It doesn't work. We can't predict the future. And what our ego loves to do, what that protection side of us loves to do, is it loves to try to predict what might happen or what you might say or how I can actually make this work for me and you, and really me, but I want to be nice, so it's you too. But really, when we're doing that, it's a selfish, self-centered thing because we're trying to play the role of both parties to make sure that we have a good deal instead of put the information out there and let somebody make a decision.
Yeah. It's an interesting kind of thing, especially when it comes to more relational situations, like relationships. It's that line of thinking, I think, would have more benefits in business. Trying to understand the other person's side and predicting kind of what they would do. But in terms of like a relationship, I think because it stems from, because it tends to be more emotional, you're not really thinking, like even when you're trying to like put the pieces together, you're not really thinking as clear as you would up. Like it's something you're not approaching with logic, or you shouldn't be. It's more emotion. So it's probably you're expending too much energy in trying to predict what the other side is going to do versus just speaking your truth and seeing what happens.
Yeah, and the question I have for you with that is, how does that show up in business? How does it show up in business that we're actually trying to logic it out instead of allowing somebody to make a decision?
I think with when people get stuck in analysis paralysis, say they're trying to put together a deal and they believe they believe it's not going to be worth it to the other person, so why even bother? I think on some level, I think there's a balance to be had because you also don't want to just be made. You don't want to be wasting your time either, right? But at the same time, you also want to make sure you're still taking action.
Absolutely. And action, we often say action is the antidote for anxiety. And anxiety, remember, the way I kind of classify anxiety is fear of the future, because I've told myself so many permeations of how bad it's going to go that now I'm freaked out about what's going to happen. So then I'm going to stop. But the funny thing is no matter what the deal is, communication is going to help us move forward on what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And so I can do, the analysis of a P&L. I can do the analysis of what it costs to run a business and then make an offer on that business based on what I think I can make and what I think it's worth, do the valuation, but still being able to present the argument. If I sit there and overthink the argument and think about how all of the different ways I'm going to get the person to do it, instead of being able to have a conversation around what they want, why they want it, how they want to actually do this deal, and what's in it for them to do the deal the way they want to versus me, I become much more focused on how to get my way, telling me that telling myself that the way I want to do it is best for them when it might not be. And so I move into convincer instead of consulting. And I don't need to convince anybody to do anything. And I think that, there's a lot of Grant Cardone stuff out there about how to actually handle objections. And most of it creates buyer's remorse because there's a lot of convincing in there. Before buyer's remorse, it convinces irritation by the person that is in the buying mode, while the seller is sitting there trying to convince them. It's an irritating experience. I don't know if you've ever had it, but I hung up on the guy because he told me the other day, this is just the other day, hung up on him because he's like, you really want to buy what I'm selling because you haven't hung up yet. Well, now you've just created a situation. I have to hang up on you. Sorry. And it's like that kind of thing is irritating. And in the beginning of the call, he was actually a pretty good salesperson until he realized that I was a no. And he switched from having a conversation saying, hey, can I call you in a month or call you in a couple of weeks and see if you changed your mind? He went into, I need to get the sale. And I could feel the switch. And that's a great example of intention got bulldozed by his ego. He had to get me. He had to get me. And as he had to get me, he got himself. He bulldozed himself because he said that fateful line, well, you want to buy this because you haven't hung up yet. Oh. So your clear understanding that I'm not willing to buy right now is only if I hit the end call sign. Well, there you go. And so now I'm not going to talk to him if he calls me again, because I already know that I have to not talk to him for him to understand that it's a no-go for me. Right? And this is the idea of he was intending to create a relationship where he could get a sale. Well, I think anybody who's done any kind of sales or been in any kind of sales situation, it takes a number of interactions with somebody to develop to remove the distrust, to develop trust, and develop somebody into a buyer. And so sometimes it's 1 or 2 calls, sometimes it's 7. A lot of people love to say it's like 12 touches before they make a sale. This guy ruined it with 1. Right? And it is the exact idea of somebody's ego bulldozing his intention, because he was actually doing really well in the beginning of the call. I could tell he had the I could feel that there was angst to make it happen, but he was withholding that, and he was actually trying to stay in the relationship kind of thing. But this happens in sales. It happens in management. When we're managing a team, we attempt to, and the intention is to get people on board with the idea. And then if it doesn't work out, instead of coaching, we start yelling, or we start, I have this little lesson that I do with people about boundaries. And people often think that boundaries are a line in the sand. You can't do that to me. And then, the other person will go right across the sand and erase the line and say, what line was it? I didn't know where the line was. Right? I didn't know. Or the line gets drawn, and then I go, oh yeah, that line right there. Okay, right over it. That was my favorite thing to do with my sister. You can't do that to me. Yeah, I can. Proved you wrong right there. And I still do that to her. We're still kids at heart, right? But the other idea of boundaries is, and the one I like to use a lot is, if you think of a basketball game or a tennis game, the boundary is where the ball goes, it's out, and we start over. And we see it bounced out. And so, okay, now it's out of bounds. We have to start the interaction over. Notice that the lines don't move in because the ball went out. The lines stay exactly where they are. Out is out, in is in, but we have to start the interaction over. And when we think about boundaries like that, it's like, oh, okay. By the way, you just knocked the ball out. I'm feeling a certain way that I didn't like. Let's start over. And when we can have conversations like that, we can keep the intention where it's supposed to be instead of bulldozing it. And what people end up doing often, instead of just restarting the conversation, say, wait a minute, whoa, we're off track here. Let's start over. What they do is they go, you hurt me internally. They don't say it out loud. You hurt me. Okay, I'm moving the lines in, and I'm moving the lines in, and I'm moving the lines in. And now, no matter what you say, I'm reactive and you're out of bounds, and I have to let you know about it. And so the idea with this idea of intention is to really think about what's going on with me and how am I in the interaction? Am I getting too bulldozy? Are they getting too bulldozy? Am I putting my hand up when I notice that I overstepped? Am I putting my hand up and saying, hey, I'm feeling like you're overstepping? And how often is that comfortable? What's that like for you when somebody's like, hey, man, you're overstepping?
Oh yeah, I mean it sucks. It's embarrassing. It's uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable. And then what happens? What happens when we overstep?
You might try and backtrack or just overtake the whole conversation, or it depends on the person. There's a multitude of things.
Yeah, I like that, and I think about, okay, so what happens, and this is very, very parallel to what happens in a relationship, whether it's a sales relationship, an intimate relationship, friend relationship. But what happens when you're playing the game of chess and you lose an important piece that you were not expecting?
Get scared.
You get scared. And then a number of frenzied moves to try to get back or try to take their piece and try to get back on the same level. And this happens often when we overstep and somebody goes, hey, I don't like that. We go, oh, we back up, try to regroup, try to bring in our defenses. And we also try to gain ground by saying, hey, you did it too. Or, hey, you made the mistake, I didn't. And turn the tables on them. And that's all ego stepping in to protect us from being wrong. And what I'm really feeling is embarrassed, like you said. I'm feeling inferior. I just screwed up. I'm feeling invalidated because they don't know that I was trying to actually have good intentions. Don't they understand? And it's all about me. And I forgot that in the interaction, and I say I forgot, but I mean it's anybody in this position forgets that I was really in the interaction, really in the relationship, in order to have some kind of outcome that's nice for both of us, but I decided what nice is too. And I didn't even know I did it because I thought we were in an interaction. I thought we were in a relationship, and I thought that we were working on it together, but I had my best interest in mind and I didn't even know it, but my ego took over. And so the question I have for a lot of people, anybody listen to this, is when do you know your ego took over? Kev, when do you know your ego took over?
It depends on the situation, but
Absolutely.
a lot of times having like that third party helps, the outside looking in. But usually, I mean, even
5 days later.
yeah. But usually it stems from something not going the way I expected, and then having to look further into it.
Absolutely. And so it's often, well, most of the time it's after we already stepped in it. We don't really see ourselves stepping in it. We really don't see ourselves doing the selfish, self-centered thing because it's an active crime scene.
Right.
It's an active interaction. And, one of the first times I ever noticed this and noticed somebody catch themselves, and it was my friend Fish. Years and years and years ago, this is like 1995, 96. I hadn't seen him for a long time, but I was with him in this old department store. Some people probably don't know what it is, but it was called Sears at the time. And so, like I said, a long, long time ago. But we were walking through the department store and he had an interaction with somebody and it didn't go well. And I don't really see this guy get flustered too much, but they had words and he walked off. And about 3 steps after the interaction, he stopped and said, "Wait a minute." And I go, "What?" And this is me, him, and his wife at the time. He goes, "I got to go do something." And he turned around and he walked back to the person and apologized to him. And I was like, "What the hell happened?" And he said something. I can't exactly remember the situation, but he said the exchange wasn't good. And I realized 3 seconds after I walked away, or 3 steps after I walked away, that I wasn't feeling good about the interaction. And I needed to fix it because it was going to bug me the rest of the day. And it was this is before I ever became a psychologist. This is before I really did a lot of any personal work. And I watched it happen. I was like, wow, you can do it that fast? That's amazing. And so I started thinking about the idea of being able to tell when something wasn't right, and how fast can we realize that something inside of us is telling us that we're off base, that there's something wrong. And what most of us do is we go, they did something to me, right? Protect me. I didn't do it. They did it to me. I'm a victim. But what he did was I was wrong in that situation. This is how I was wrong in it. And he forgot entirely about the other person's issue. And by the way, watching, I don't think the other guy was right either. But he didn't care about that. And I was like, that's amazing. We can also forgive and forget about what the other person did, and we can just be responsible for ourselves. That's amazing. It was a revelation. And so as I paid attention to that more, and I started paying attention to myself and what I was experiencing in those moments, it was like, oh my gosh, I can tell when I'm feeling embarrassed right away. I can tell when I'm feeling inferior. I can tell when I'm feeling powerless. I can tell when I'm feeling worth less than the other person, or worth less than what I should in that situation. And so I could tell that these emotions are going, but we have to be able to identify it. We have to be able to identify what's going on with us. And so how do we stop this intention from being bulldozed by the ego? And the answer is being intentional about identifying what's happening with us in the moment. And it takes being vulnerable, which is a very difficult thing for people to do when we're used to being protective. What do you think of that? I laid a lot out there.
I agree.
Oh, okay. Say more about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that it's uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable to face yourself and to acknowledge your own faults, even when there are especially when there's legitimate faults on the other side. But you can only really take responsibility for yourself.
Absolutely.
It's if you can get over that hump, it's worth it.
It's a big hump. And the funny thing is the hump isn't necessarily anything other than our ego telling us we shouldn't look further inside, because you know what? You're going to just see worse. And it's amazingly sad that we're set up this way, because most people, and especially the positive thinkers in the world, and the people that love the idea of always being positive and uplifting and all of this stuff. Well, the reality is we got to be that because we're not. And we got to focus on that because we're not. And at the core of most of us is a little bit of fear. And there's a lot of self-talk that is and the self-talk kind of goes like, they might think that you're not a good guy. They might think that you're this. They might think that you're that. They might think that you're trying to take advantage of them. And then the ego, in a half a second of saying that, goes, you know what, let's remove the might because it's a little too slow. They are thinking that. And so then we try to trick ourselves into getting into a positive mindset and mindset the heck out of ourselves, almost like trying to steroid ourselves with mindset and steroid ourselves with this positive mental attitude stuff that people talk about. And we try to convince ourselves that we're okay when we're frightened. And then we come off a little bit weird or even, and it doesn't go well. And then we got to double down on what we're doing. And people, you know, and this, if you've ever had bad sales calls, this is exactly what happened. Right? If you had bad conversations with your partner or with friends, even, maybe your friend wants to sue you. Who knows? This is what happens: is somebody's ego bulldozed the situation. Why are you laughing? Somebody's ego bulldozed their intentions, and then they got to stick to it, and then they got to prove they're right
to their own detriment. Sometimes
to their own detriment, and then everybody's upset with each other because really our ego got the best of us. And once our ego gets the best of us, most of the time the ego goes, we got to fight this thing to the death. And I have in one of my presentations, I have a little slide with a little armor guy with a sword, and it says 3-letter word ruins a 12-letter word. I think it's 12. And a little riddle for you. And it's ego ruins relationships. And so when we think about the idea of this idea of intentions get bulldozed by the ego, what's really happening is our ego is setting us up to be protected, but it protects by separation, and it protects by attack, and it protects by demolishing relationships. And so we, in order to actually feel really good about what we're doing and to make some changes in our relationships, the first thing we have to do is really look at ourselves and what emotions are being triggered that our ego has to protect us against. And when we can do that, we start to actually see that, oh, wait a minute, it was me, not them. We put our hand up and say, I was wrong. And that actually repairs a relationship. Have you ever noticed when you admit you're wrong, people kind of like it?
Yeah. It takes two to tango, you know, for an argument. And if you're just surrendering, you know, to their argument, essentially, it's like it kind of puts them in a pause. Where do you go from there?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the thing that I've noticed is if I am, and I don't know about you, but if I'm in an argument, and I get into them sometimes, if I'm in an argument and I'm planting my flag in that I'm right about whatever I am, what do you think? And what's your experience of what do other people do when you're doing that?
They're just going to try and prove you wrong.
Right. And so what happens, weird enough, when we go, no, it was all my fault?
They're going to try and prove you right. They'll be like, oh, well.
That's the fear. But over and over and over, I see that if I go, you know what, it's all my fault, people, unless they're protecting themselves and they're really ego out also, and they go, yeah, you were, they'll go, well, I don't think it was all your fault. I think I did this and that, and they'll back up too. And it's pretty cool, because when we start to accept responsibility for what we did, or even over responsibility for the situation, people are almost selfish about that too. And they're like, no, you didn't cause it all. I did this and I did that. And we can actually start to divvy up responsibility a little bit. And then we can, and it's funny because it's almost like now we're going to look in the box that we were both avoiding and pushing back and forth saying it was your fault, no, okay, let's look at, okay, this is my fault, that, okay, and you're saying this is your fault, and so we can actually go, okay, so now where do we go? Now that we know where we made mistakes, how do we reset? And it's a pretty cool thing when we can do that. But in order to be able to do that really well, we also, personally, I think the best way to go about doing that, and what I've seen work for most of the people that I've ever worked with, is when we can identify our emotions. That's what I'm unpacking from the box, is like, okay, this is what happened, and this, I was feeling stupid, and I was feeling a little bit powerless, and so I said this and that, and I didn't mean it, and it was wrong. I shouldn't have said that. I can't really take it back, but I did say it because I felt these emotions, and that's not your fault. I put it on you. And the weirdest thing is when we admit that stuff, the other people start to open up, and they start to become vulnerable, and they admit where they made a mistake if they did. And they also start to allow forgiveness in the interaction. And we can actually start talking about whatever we're going to be doing instead, or talking about whatever the topic was that is important. And so the antidote for the ego is vulnerability in identifying the emotions. And so if we want to live with the intention and follow the intention, you know, I am a one-trick pony. That's very true. I've been called that many times. But the funny thing is the ego has so many ways to ride that we miss that the one trick to work through ego is the emotions. And the ego is going to come at us from 9 billion different ways to trick us into bulldozing the intention. The antidote: identify the emotions that were triggered, and the ego starts to let go of protection. And so it's an interesting thing, but when we can do that and we can live emotionally connected to ourselves, and I'll say again, emotions, not behavior. Anger's behavior, sadness behavior, happy's behavior. When we can actually get to the emotion, feeling disconnected, feeling powerless, feeling inferior, feeling invalidated, we can identify where we're feeling those. The ego stops fighting, and we can start being relational. And so the whole idea that we want to do that's really helpful is to start being more intentional about identifying our emotions instead of identifying how we're right.
I like it.
Yeah. So in your daily walk, start paying attention to the intention, the emotion, instead of bulldozing. See what happens. So I think we talked this one out. What do you think? Got anything to add? Last words?
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. Emotions over ego. Identify them.
Yep. Yeah, all right. So we'll see you guys next week.
Adios, everybody.
Adios.